Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the special episode of InFocus on Yeonpyeong attack. After the surprise attack of North Korea on Yeonpyeong Island, South Korea has been thrown into a state of shock. The joint military exercise between South Korea and the U.S. is taking place in the West Sea. China proposed a resumption of the six-party talk. And South Korean President Lee Myung-bak made a special address. Let's try to assess the recent developments on the Korean Peninsula after the newsreel.
6 days after the deadly Yeonpyeong attack by North Korea, which caused the deaths of 2 Marines and 2 civilians, President Lee Myung-bak made a special address to the nation on the 29th to reaffirm Seoul's firm stance against the North.
민간인을 향해 군사 공격을 하는 것은 전 시에도 엄격하게 금지되는 반인륜적 범죄입니다. 이제 북한 스스로 군사적 모험주의와 핵을 포기하는 것을 기대하기는 힘들다는 것을 알게 되었습니다. 앞으로 북의 도발에는 반드시 응분의 대가를 치르게 할 것입니다. 저는 우리 국민의 용기와 저력을 믿습니다.
This address came just 1 day after the president's discussions with Chinese State Councilor Dai Bing-guo in Seoul. The talk lasted for 2 hours and 15 minutes, but seems to have failed in achieving a clear consensus. China's foreign ministry made an emergency announcement right after the talks, calling for consultations between the envoys for the resumption of the six-party talks. To China's request, Seoul made clear its position that the timing is not right for discussions on the issue. Meanwhile, joint military exercises between the U.S. and South Korea are taking place in the West Sea, sending out the Allies' message of solidarity and preparedness against future provocations.
Welcome back. We have 2 experts in the studio to discuss the recent developments on the Korean Peninsula. Joining on my right is Professor Dennis Florig. Professor Florig is at the Division of International Studies at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And joining on my left is Professor Kim Jang-ho. Professor Kim Jang-ho is a research professor at the Yonsei Graduate School of International Studies. Thank you for your valuable time today.
Thank you.
Okay, let me begin with you, Professor Kim. President Lee Myung-bak made a special address to the nation. So what are the major points that we have to take note?
Well, I've noted 4 points upon listening to his speech. The first would be the deep sense of responsibility, obviously, that he feels as president, as our commander-in-chief, and as a person who's ultimately responsible for the security of this nation. Second point would be, and this goes, I think, without saying, a strong denunciation of North Korean provocations and their attack on the Yeonpyeong Island. The other 2 points I found more noteworthy were his call for unity. And I think this is a message sent both domestically as well as internationally. We remember after the Cheonan incident, there was a divide within this country on, well, with the number one, how to perceive the event itself as well as how to proceed with measures against North Korea to prevent such attack in the future. I think we also have to remember the division that was in place within Northeast Asia, particularly between South Korea and the United States, and on the one side, and with China on the other. I think he had those 2 things in mind when he called for unity. The final point, he mentioned that he sees no more hope of North Korea reforming on its own. And I think this is an indication of the necessity of tougher measures that he feels is necessary, and also a reaffirmation of a tough stance that we should be taking, as we did after the Cheonan incident. What I found interesting is that I think that through this message, I think he feels that some things might be different from the post-Cheonan to post-Yeonpyeong.
I see. Professor Florig, did President Lee mention anything about Chinese proposal to resume six-party talk? I mean, can you say that the target of his address has been mainly domestic audience,
I think it was both domestic and foreign, and I think Professor Kim is correct that he wants to take a stronger line and demonstrate military strength. But on the other hand, I think it's revealing what was not said. President Lee did not repeat his recent calls for retaliation. He talked about strengthening the Korean military and taking action, but he actually announced no direct action. With regard to China, I think it's significant that he made no comment about China. I think South Korea is not really certain what direction China is going to go, and therefore is not really certain what to say about the Chinese role at this time, although clearly China will play an important role. I also think it was significant that he didn't stress much the military exercises being carried on right now by the United States and South Korea. Rather than saber rattling and blustering, I think he's just relying on the actual show of strength to project a message. Overall, I think the speech was admirably restrained. Most South Koreans want revenge or some kind of retaliation or some kind of action. But we have to keep in mind that any military action poses the threat of some kind of escalation into a major conflict or even another Korean War. There's a saying, discretion is the greater part of valor. That means that real courage, real bravery, sometimes is being cautious.
Okay, I see. Speaking of the joint military exercise taking place in the West Sea between the United States and South Korea, what are the objectives of the joint military exercise? I mean, what are the scales and the contents of the military exercise this time?
Well, the contents, I think, foremost is the aircraft carrier George Washington, almost 100,000-ton warship. It's capable of unleashing more firepower than some of the entire wars that we've encountered in this century. I think, as Professor Froehlich mentioned, more than anything, it's a show of force and a show of solidarity between the United States and South Korea. I think this is basically sending message to North Korea in general, but to China in particular as well. I think that this time around that they want China with the international community as opposed to protecting North Korea overly, as they did during the Cheonan incident. I think most importantly, remember they left out the aircraft carrier in the exercises just immediately after the Cheonan incident. This time they have included it. Obviously with the aircraft carrier, this wasn't announced. There would be other ships that are in that task force that's capable of unleashing nuclear missiles. Possibly nuclear submarines can be in the vicinities. So I think this sends a strong message to China, not just North Korea.
Also to Chinese. North Koreans' response. I mean, they have said a number of times that if joint military exercise takes place as scheduled, this will push the situation to the brink of war. So what has been the response of North Koreans so far, and what do you think would be the response of North Koreans in the future to joint military exercise?
And they warned before the recent exercises that there would be a physical response. However, I think it's unlikely, given that they've already made one attack, that they're going to use military force again, particularly against the United States. They realize the danger in that. But I think we need to look at the motives behind the North Korean attack on Yeonpyeong. I think they've been often misstated in the Korean media and in the American media, for that matter, or even among analysts. I think to some degree, the South Korean government and the American government are being taken in by their own propaganda. There have been many motives attributed to North Korea for this attack, such as a desire to force a resumption of talks or to strengthen Kim Jong-un's position in the succession struggle. But I think the explanation is much simpler. I think that they felt directly threatened by the exercises that recently took place, which were unprecedented in size and scope, which included live fire, in a zone which North Korea actually claims as its own territory.
If that is the case, do you think this exercise could escalate the situation into sort of a full-blown military conflict on the Korean Peninsula?
As I said, I think the North Koreans will be careful enough not to confront the United States directly. But I do think we do need to see this current situation as a cycle of escalation and counter-escalation. I think it's a mistake to see the attack on Yongpyeong Island or the attack on the Cheonan, if in fact it wasn't a planned North Korean attack, as coming completely out of the blue, as having no rational basis. In December of 2009, there was a conflict in the West Sea between South Korean and North Korean ships in which several North Korean sailors were killed. And I think if it was, in fact, a North Korean action, I think you need to see the Cheonan, sinking of the Cheonan, in light of that. And in the same way, I think you need to see the North Korean firing on Yongpyeong as, from their point of view, a reaction to what they feel is a very physical threat. This is not to justify North Korea's actions, but if you're ever going to make any progress in negotiations, or you're ever going to be able to de-escalate the situation, you do need to have a correct analysis of North Korea's behavior.
I see, I see. Professor Kim, you just said that one of the objectives of the joint military drill is to send a signal not only to North Koreans but also to Chinese as well. But Chinese position about this joint military exercise has been fairly constant. We are opposed to joint military exercise taking place so close to our mainland. But this time, China has been relatively quiet about this issue. What do you make of this?
Well, it's very interesting to note that they are differing in their behavior. If you remember the last time after the Cheonan, they held their own military exercises in opposing the military exercises that were being held by the United States and South Korea. I think this might be seen as a sign by Washington and by Seoul, our government, that China may be able to be on the side of international justice and international norms this time. It might be an indication of that, but I think we have to be a little bit more careful because their position concerning North Korea has not changed since then till now. Yes, they see this as well, I don't really know how they see this, whether they really do see, the phrase they used was, there have arisen some complexities on the Korean Peninsula. So, which means they're not saying who attacked who, why this was caused. They're just seeing it as a problem that may cause instability on their border, and that's their primary concern. How this is resolved is secondary to them. So, in light of their priorities, I really don't see how China will fully cooperate with the alliance that is in place between South Korea and the United States, and also with Japan as well.
There's some analysts are saying that if you take a look at the newspaper articles in China these days, that these Chinese newspaper articles are beginning to criticize North Koreans, saying that North Koreans has put us into diplomatically very difficult situation. So can we say that there has been a change of attitude in China toward North Korea?
Well, I think that sort of voice...
But we have to be very careful.
Yes, I think so, because I think that sort of voice has been there, particularly in around Hong Kong area, in the southern areas of China, where they have much more contact with the outside world. But I'm not sure if that will infiltrate into the government's thinking and really change their fundamental priorities concerning the Korean Peninsula.
Speaking of Chinese government's response, the Chinese government announced that they are calling for resumption of the six-party talk, and they're saying that six-party talk is the best venue to resolve the current situation. But the South Korean government is saying that, well, this is not really a right time to talk about resumption of the six-party talk. So there's one party saying that we need six-party talk, and the other party is saying that, no, it's not the right time. So what do we make of
I think the best approach is somewhere in the middle. But before I comment on that, I'd like to respond to the general question about China's role. I think it's a mistake to ever expect China to simply fall behind U.S. and South Korean policy towards North Korea. China has a completely different historical relationship. China has a completely different set of interests with regard to North Korea. I do think that the North Korean behavior has alarmed them. But I think that they hope to play a mediating role. They hope to bring together South and North Korea. And therefore, I believe they are deliberately avoiding direct criticism of the North Korean government because that would go against their role as a neutral mediator. Now, with regard to resumption of talks, I do believe it would be a mistake to resume the six-party talks in their older format. Because there are, at this time, irreconcilable differences with regard to nuclear issues and security issues. Their issues are just too thorny and unlikely to be resolved in any short period of time. On the other hand, I do think that some kind of emergency session of the six parties that would discuss solely the current crisis and the current tensions on the peninsula and de-escalation of the current situation on the peninsula would be fruitful. So I think South Korean government is essentially correct that it would be a mistake to simply have another session of the six-party talks as they've gone historically. But I also think that China is correct that it's important to have direct talks between South and North and the United States and China as soon as possible, as long as both the DPRK and the other parties are willing to engage in serious discussions rather than just use the talks as a megaphone to blame the other parties.
What do you think, Professor Kim? Should we or should we not go along with China's proposal?
Well, I think it's fairly clear that the United States, South Korea, as well as Japan, and possibly Russia are not willing to, I think the signals thus far are not willing to re-implement the six-party talks as the vehicle for to resolve the conflicts of interest that is in place, particularly with this issue at Yeonpyeong. I think it's too early to presume that this vehicle of the six-party talks I'm talking about, this six-party talk specifically designed to deal with the nuclear issue, and through its history, it has become a symbol of the North Korean nuclear problem. I don't think we can actually expect the countries involved, particularly South Korea, to go back to this forum after the attack on Yeonpyeong, because this would be North Korea has constantly been demanding the resumption of the six-party talks, even prior to Cheonan and after Cheonan and prior to Yeonpyeong. And thus, I think that would be seen to the public and to the international public, wider public, as well as basically giving into North Korea's demands. So I think South Korea will try to do their best, at least our government will try to do their demands. So I think South Korea will try to do their best, at least our government will try to do their best to stay away from the six-party vehicle for the time being, and try to get some sort of, well, I'm not sure if we can get that, but an apology or some sort of a responsibility taken by North Korea. Before that, there may be working group discussions that may take place, and this could be covered within the six-party umbrella, but the resumption of six-party talks as it is, I think, is difficult.
Well, I agree, but again, I think this should be considered an emergency special session of the six-party talks, not to deal with the historical issues, which have proven very thorny and very difficult to resolve, but to deal simply with the current situation in the West Sea, and to deal simply with the current level of tensions, and to work for some resolution of that issue and that issue alone, and not to bring in other issues.
Let's talk about the current status of cooperation between China and North Korea. I learned that North Korean, this key figure, Choi Jae-bok, I think he's the secretary of the North Korea's Workers' Party. He's visiting China in upcoming week, and in response to that, China's key figure is also visiting North Korea. So what would they discuss? And what does it really say about the current status of cooperation between China and North Korea? Is it still wet and alive? Is it still very much intact as it used to be?
No, I think that North Korea has, in several ways, damaged their relationship with China over the years. China was openly critical of them after their nuclear tests. But I think the Chinese learned from that experience that North Korea is a dictatorship which brooks no criticism of its ultimate leaders. And for the Chinese to openly and directly criticize North Korea only makes North Korea tune them out. So I think we have to rely that China has the longest running relationship with North Korea. I think we should have some faith in China's understanding of how to deal with North Korea. I don't think we should have magical expectations that the Chinese can snap their fingers and the North Koreans are going to follow. But I do think that China is the only interlocutor that can actually reach the North Koreans, and we should allow some leeway for Chinese judgment about what is the best way to deal with the North Koreans.
Professor Kim, what are the policy options available to South Korea, except holding joint military exercise, which I think is fairly symbolic at best? What are the policy options available for South Korean government to penalize North Korean provocation and to deter further provocations on the part of North Koreans?
Well, frankly speaking, and I think as is well known, I think President Lee Myung-bak and our government has pretty much one hand tied behind our backs. This is because we already have sanctions in place with the United Nations. That's pretty much as enforceable as can be. Basically, what it comes down to is, does China want to pressure North Korea? Does China want to comply with the sanctions that are being enforced currently as a result of the Cheonan issue? And also another question would be, can they, if they wanted to, pressure North Korea? Because as was mentioned by Professor Froelich, we may have to see this in a very different light concerning China and North Korea, because they too have different priorities. Like I said, China has stability on its borders as a number one priority, to concentrate on their economic growth, which basically legitimizes their communist regime. So they do not want to get embroiled into any sort of conflict. North Korea, on the other hand, their diplomatic goals are, number one, to normalize relationships, particularly with the United States, which would mean aid, and be recognized as a nuclear power. These are pretty much two incompatible goals, even between the relationship that they call the lips-to-teeth relationship. So I think because of these disparity in the strategic goals of the two countries, it's an open question as to whether China can pressure North Korea. So a lot of effort will have to be focused on ways to convince China to take measures so that they can influence North Korea to a degree. And also, I think there's a disparity between South Korea and the United States as well in terms of goals. Strategically, I think we have to have very, very close relations, and that's very, very often said. But what I mean is the United States in both, we need to be similar in both strategic and tactical goals, as well as its implementations. By that, what I mean is United States will obviously have proliferation of nuclear weapons on the top of their list, whereas for South Korea, it is attainable security from prevention of another attack from taking place. Now, this can be incompatible, so this will require very, very close coordination.
I see. But as an immediate policy response to Yeonpyeong provocation, what do you think about bringing this issue to the UN Security Council?
This issue, the issue of North Korean behavior has been before the Security Council several times. As Professor Kim said, the sanctions couldn't be much tighter, at least on paper. There is a desire in South Korea to punish North Korea for what it's done recently, both in Yongpyeong and Cheonan incident. But the fact is, the general South Korean policy and U.S. policy has been sanctions and punishment, and there's not much more that can be done short of military action. And military action always carries the risk that we can't calculate what is the threshold for the North Koreans to launch into a major conflict. So the fact is there really isn't much to do to punish the North Koreans. The only thing that can be relied on is international pressure to convince them that it is in fact in their interest to ratchet down the tensions that will in fact increase their security if the tensions are in fact brought down a notch.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. I think this is how we're going to wrap up today's discussion. Thank you very much for sharing your insights today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a very important issue for the future of the Korean Peninsula. We need to pay very close attention to the evolving situations. This has been Kim Jae-chun for InFocus. Thank you for watching us.